Welcome to the Exchange Coffee Podcast, part of the Exchange Coffee Podcasting Network, where coffee people talk to coffee people about coffee and things coffee adjacent. The Exchange is brought to you by Kavoya Specialty Coffee and is hosted by Mark Inman and Todd Mackey. This is episode 38, and the topic is traveling to origin, the who, what, when, where, why, and how of traveling to origin for those who work in the coffee industry. This is the topic for 44 minutes anyway. Around 44 minutes, and without warning, Mark introduces a completely new topic, and that discussion, which is not about origin travel, the topic of this episode, lasts around 8 minutes. I will cut in when the time comes to introduce the new topic. Some might even say the off-topic topic. And now, here they are, Mark and Todd.
We're here to talk about visiting origin, Mark. I know that this is not something you've done often. You tend to be more of a demonstrator, as I hear.
Right. Yeah. I just sit behind my computer.
Kidding. Your passport is exhausted with visa stamps and all sorts of entry and exit stamps. Let's unpack the who, what, why, how, where type of questions as it relates to origin travel. Take us away. Where do you want to begin?
Well, I guess taking it away would be, why does one normally feel the need to travel to origin? Just taking just the interest in travel out, off the table. Why, as a professional coffee buyer, a company manager, a barista, why would you feel compelled to travel to origin? And when you're there, what is the goal that you have in mind? And we could talk about some of our, successes and missteps we've had over our years. I certainly have had many. But I think that would be the thing that we would address here. I guess my first curiosity, I don't think we've talked about this before. Where was your first origin trip?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. My first origin trip was to Tarrazú, Costa Rica.
Okay.
And I visited a cooperative micro mill called Asoproa. And this was a trip that I took. I was working for a regional roaster called New Harvest Coffee. Shout out New Harvest, Rick Kleinfeld.
Right. Old school.
Who offered me this opportunity. And we had been buying coffees with this group from a number of different farms. And they had created an opportunity for me to join one of the then domestic champion baristas. And we brought equipment up to the wet mill up at elevation. And we actually took an afternoon and taught a class on espresso preparation to a lot of the farmer partners in the association. And we were preparing all sorts of different micro lots from their farms. And for some of them, it was the first time they had tasted their coffees as espresso. And this blew me away. I was absolutely blown away. I've never taken a trip for that reason ever since. I've traveled far and wide. And had unbelievable opportunities to visit with groups and accomplish other goals. But yeah, this was the express purpose was essentially to honor our roaster farmer relationship by going and prepping the coffees and serving the coffees to the farmers of the group, and it was pretty life-changing.
Wow. Funny, Todd, that you bring this up. My first origin trip was to Costa Rica as well.
No way.
Yes.
Whereabouts? Where did you go?
So I at the time, I was, I don't think I was dating my first wife, who had lived there, did her master's there. So I was buying coffee from the Monteverde Cloud Forest. It's an organic project there. And she was a part of a solar dryer project. A man named Raul Redalis made this mechanical solar dryer it was like a machine with these vertical trays that you could kind of tilt and, pass warm air through it versus patios. And yeah, we were sourcing a coffee, an organic coffee out of the cloud forest. It was a fantastic trip. and I learned a ton. I mean, she had lived there, so it was a good introduction to the coffee scene there, having somebody who was very familiar with the area. But yeah, that was back in, I want to say like the mid 90s is when I went down there.
Well, and that brings me to what I wanted to pose to you as a question, or just maybe a launching point is you, given your age and tenure in specialty coffee, I don't get to get you for this as much as I would like these days, but you were running your roasting company at a time when origin travel was not the standard like it is now or has been over the last 8 to 10 years. And really, from where I sit, I would cite you, Rob, along with a handful of others, as part of the group that really popularized, in a way, I don't mean to,
for better or for worse,
I don't mean to suggest you were necessarily the champion of the, jet setter coffee buyer, but you guys were certainly in that community.
Yes.
And I guess it'd be a great opportunity to unpack a little bit of the advent of origin travel as part of the coffee buyer role. If you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of, how and why that began to become a thing.
Right.
Someone like I can pick it up 5 or 10 years after that when we started it. I think it was spreading from there as, it was becoming normative to expect that you travel to origin when you are serious, supply chain worker in coffee.
Yeah.
But at that time, it seemed like, there was a handful of buyers that were taking these trips to places that otherwise you didn't go.
Yeah.
So what was that?
Well, I want to, I want to address two things with that answer. So I
should also interject and just say, you're so cool.
Oh, get out of here.
You're so cool.
So my reasons for doing origin travel in the early 90s was more out of necessity to build my company. And what I mean by that is when the company I had started in 1991 was 100% organic. There was that's all we purchased. And at the time there was Peru, Sumatra, Mexico, and Guatemala were like the only options. And so I felt like an artist who, had 3 colors to paint with, whereas you had a full palette. And the company I owned had a working organic farm, a 200-acre educational farm here in Northern California. So what we were doing initially was identifying cooperatives that were willing to convert to organic. We would send our farmers down there and teach these methodologies. And in the case of the Monteverde group, we flew them to California. They stayed with us for a month and learned various techniques on how to make a production farm and using organic methods if they had not learned that before. So I was converting farms and building a supply channel. That in turn, as that supply channel grew beyond my ability to purchase, I started networking with people like Rob, who was at Frontier Coffee at the time, a big organic group that was out of Iowa, John Cassette at Royal, and other folks, Adam Teitelbaum with Adams Organics. And I was developing this network of organic buyers for organic farmers. That was how I got into it. And from that, I got invited by NGOs and governmental groups to do project work around organic agriculture and spreading education about permaculture, agroecology, these terms. Now it's regenerative during those years. Now I fell into this group that was shortly after me that became like rock star buyers, and they were selling this image of like an Indiana Jones, swashbuckling through forests to find these gems in the middle of nowhere. And they were writing a lot of romantic stories about it, and it became very trendy to want to be seen by your customer base or by potential customers for your company as somebody who was like really digging in the middle of nowhere for the best coffees in the world. And it created in many ways a monster that I think ruined things for new buyers today who, those travel budgets no longer exist, and the ability to travel 10 months of the year is almost unheard of now. But it was very common, I would say, in like the early 2000s to like the 2012s. I mean, a lot of people we know made their names as these people, these kind of rock star buyers.
Yeah, no, I think my first trip that I talked about was in 2010, 2011.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So it was right in that time where, I think, from my perception coming in, it was sort of like, that's what you want to do.
Oh, of course.
I mean, but I think also just being that, I love travel. I always have. And so a huge part of my own personal goals was, part of my work in coffee was, I would love to travel. I would love to understand, the socio-political environments that this coffee is coming out of, how I can contribute positively. And, it wasn't just about like, cupping snowflake nano lots and drinking local hooch like as the sun goes down on the patio. But, there are those moments, don't get me wrong. But it's interesting how over the arc of, coming into the 2010s and then obviously at the tail end of that decade, getting to the place where amidst a lot of stress on those travel budgets to begin with, all of a sudden we enter a global pandemic and the nature of travel for coffee buying changes. So now we find ourselves here where, we have a lot of pressure. The economic environment around specialty coffee is obviously very tense at this moment and has been over the last 5 years, given all the ups and downs through the pandemic and such. So I think the question becomes like, what role should origin travel or could origin travel play in a healthy roasting program? And what should our listeners be considering when they're asking themselves the question of, hey, should I travel to origin? Could I travel to origin? And what can I expect from it? What can I hope to accomplish?
Yeah, I think that, where things went awry back in the middle of that kind of arc that you just painted was that people were traveling a lot, and what it wasn't doing is reflected in their cost of goods. They didn't factor in all these trips to the price of the coffee, and it didn't reflect in the retail price. So, and then when the P&L came out, it's like, hey, we're losing money here. And they tried to turn it more into a traditional buyer's job, which is all desk, pencil, calculator. And that to me was an overcorrection. And what we're suggesting today is there's some comfortable medium. There's somewhere in the middle that makes absolute sense. I'm a firm believer that origin travel is important first and foremost for relationship building. If you intend on working with a group, be it an estate, a cooperative, a single farm, you want to maintain this relationship over a long period of time, you have to have FaceTime. You cannot do it over computers. You cannot just buy and sell and expect the relationship to flourish. Human contact is essential, and it solidifies that relationship. And a lot of things happen where if you weren't physically there, the relationship can kind of fizzle away. And I think that the initial trip, if I was to reverse, start all over again, or if I owned a roasting company and I was going to, support one of my buyers to go on a trip, the first and foremost would be a group trip of some kind with other roasters, maybe hosted by an importing company, because the breadth and depth of the trip and the richness of that experience is a good foundation for future travel that you may do alone. Some of my most rewarding trips have been group trips.
Oh, always. I would actually suggest that's a better way to travel. It's certainly more secure, like in places that may have security issues, of which there are those.
Right.
But also, I think a huge component is that interconnection, the trading of information, the trading of insights and experience, and that comes with being open to other people's stories.
Right.
Certainly. I would argue that one of the biggest reasons to travel cannot be to cup and approve coffees. You can use
Speak of cup coffee, I wouldn't be buying
as a way of discovering potential opportunities. But yeah, it's much more a targeted relationship building opportunity, getting to know a community, identifying potential counterparties, maybe tasting coffees to get some sort of feelers in new places. But that's lab work for, your home lab where you're comfortable, where the variables, you can control them. But the biggest thing to me is to be in community with the people you're doing business with. Not only to invest in the relationship and to be seen as doing such, but to really understand even just the sort of intangibles around the relationship and how these groups are working or not working in the community. I mean, some of these things are immediately apparent. I've had trips where, I could in 10 minutes know that this was not the group I want to do business with.
Sure.
For, the feeling and the sort of baggage and weight of their connections within their upstream networks, just to feel how tense, those relationships were, or how distant they felt in visiting, with other parts of those chains. And that's been hugely informative.
Well, as well as it informs you on the capabilities of the group. You may, from a group, be getting samples sent up here. They could have some, Katuras and some Typicas, and then they have some micro lots. You're like, whoa, these micro lots, this is what I want to focus on. And you're just, in your communication, pushing micro lot, and then you go down there and you see that was a one-off. I mean, they're not really set up to do micro lots, and they really are built for more larger quantities of coffee. And if that's what you're seeking, that could be a bad fit. Those are the things you couldn't really tell unless you were down there to see it. So yes, don't buy, no matter how excited you are about a coffee. Take the sample home, cup it in the comfort of your own lab with your own equipment, and then you can throw the spoon across the room and get elated if that's what you want to do. But that is great advice. I think that, but yeah, ultimately it's to observe the fit of the group you're trying to work with, and whether or not that the things that throw up flags, whether green flags or red flags, taking note of that stuff and going home and thinking about it on the flight home. Is this a group I could really, have my company be tied to and feel good about, or do I feel like I'm having a positive impact? I mean, sometimes I've seen, buyers that, they go down there like, oh, I'm going to build a school. I'm going to build this. I'm going to do that. And the group doesn't need any of that. They, what they need is better tanks or a project to build hoop houses. And it's not necessarily earth shattering, but it's essential for them to make that leap to constantly improve their quality for you, the customer, is to understand what you're interested in doing for some of these groups or your collaborations, and whether or not those needs fit your needs. And so I think that it's a courting period. That's why you would go visit. And don't overcomplicate it. I wouldn't run down there with film crews and shoot a lot of stuff. As much as, these are expensive trips and you want to make the most of it. What I wish I would have done in my earlier trips is talked less, listened more, and just took notes. My story is unimportant to the farmer for the most part at that initial stage, and it's I'm either interested in buying or I'm not. Once I buy and once I start repeatedly supporting these groups, then we can start to build that personal relationship. But initially, it's a business contact.
Yeah, I think as we pull apart some of the factors in terms of like engineering origin travel, you get to a place of the potential. We have to, of course, start to look at how does one, from a business standpoint, sew in the costing for supporting origin travel, not only for the primary, but as a part of the professional development strategy for the team. Like, where does this sit
Right.
in the P&L? How do you account for this from your perspective? As someone who's run a roasting company, what is a healthy outlook for this, Mark?
Well, I think you could argue it from two perspectives, and I think people have done that in the past. One is, if you're bringing a film crew, if you're recording things, doing stuff for the gram, it's a pure marketing expense. So you could put it in your marketing budget. But for me, it's a clear cost of goods. It's part of the cost of goods of that coffee. So if you tend to, have to go to an origin or a specific group more than once or twice a year because you're trying to develop a microlab program or some kind of crazy new project, that is going to reflect in the ultimate cost of that green coffee. It has to, because it's a real expense that you're absorbing. And in many ways, it far exceeds the amount of that you're spending on the green coffee itself.
100%. Yeah. And to what degree do you've been involved in various direct investments within supply chains that you bought from during your time roasting. We, of course, do a lot of the same, both directly and indirectly through our supply chains at Covoya here.
Yes.
I think it would be a missed opportunity to skip over the question of, how, if I feel beyond visiting, growing empathy and understanding culturally of the people that I'm doing business with and understanding their real needs and concerns,
right?
How do I, beyond being a faithful buyer that shows up year after year and tries to grow and expand my business, how do I have a positive impact on the community? Many of us want to invest in infrastructural needs, whether farm level or community level.
Right.
What would you say are important considerations when this is something you care about as a roaster?
If this is something that you care about, I was going to initially say, first understand that for the most part, most roasting companies are for-profit companies. They're not NGOs. They're not nonprofits. So, there is the want to do the work of a nonprofit as a for-profit company, and you have to weigh, is that the mission of your brand first and foremost? If it's a part of it, I've always felt the best way to go about that, using the various things that I've done in the past, is ask them, what is it? What are their pain points? It could be social pain points. We don't have an adequate school. We don't have clean water. We don't have, sanitation. We don't have access to medicine. That could be it. It could be what I find many cases. I made these wooden fermentation boxes and the coffee has constant defect. And if I could eliminate the defect, I would make more money. Well, yes, we could, invest in, polypropylene tanks that you could do this in, or, concrete or tile. In some communities where it's very humid or a lot of fog comes in, fog drip, you could do a hoop house to help keep the coffee dry. It's assess their needs. Don't make assumptions of what they need. It's ask them. They'll tell you. They know because they struggle with it day in, day out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and to how many times have you been at Origin where a farmer or a group of farmers asks you, hey, what should I plant? Or,
Yeah.
how should I process this coffee? I feel like this gets to that. My suggestion, I always try for early, first few times, traveling type of travelers, I am always very, vocal about trying to remind them like, hey, you are a roaster, you're an expert roaster, but
Right.
telling someone how to hinge the success or failure of their farm,
Right.
on your whim in a place that you're visiting for the first time ever. These are very dubious things to get into and risky and dangerous with very low accountability typically, unless you're guaranteeing to buy that.
Right.
It really is not
Right.
your business to tell someone what to do. But
Well, especially if you don't have an agronomy degree,
for sure,
that would be first and foremost. That is a very common problem that I've seen on just about every Origin trip I've been on, where, a roaster may cup through their lineup and they'd say, well, what I've seen, I really, I saw this geisha being planted in Panama, and you should plant your entire farm in geisha. And the farmer will take that to heart, and they will start to do things. Or what you do is, you'll find a weird variety on the table, and you'll say, more of this, please. And that's perfectly okay to make that observation of more of this if it's possible. But what you don't know is that particular variety suited for that area? I mean, is it prone to disease? Is it prone to blight? If you put your eggs in the basket of plant pure Bourbon and they did it, and then rust hit and you wipe their farm out, how are you going to sit with yourself at night? I had an interesting interaction with Osvaldo Acevedo, who owns Finca El Roble, which was called Mesa de los Santos. He's in northern Colombia, and it's about a 700-acre farm.
Bucaramanga in Santander. I know this well because the one time I competed as a barista, I used his Bourbon variety as my competition coffee. Continue.
So he had a library farm that had about 68 varieties, many of which were deemed extinct or just so extremely rare. And what it was a lot of us. I was actually smuggling into Colombia seeds that I would get in other parts of the world labeled and bring it to him. He would plant it, and then he would have like 30 to 60 trees per variety. He used to do a cupping event that lasted a few days where you would go through the library, cup these coffees, and these were crazy coffees like Pretoria that looked like an apple, but it was segmented like an orange where it had 6 seeds in it, or Purpurascens and Racemosa and all these crazy varieties that 4 different types of Liberica, and leaves that were the size of a giant palm leaf down to little tiny purple leaves on a tree. Roasters went insane for it. And what they were saying is, I want you to plant me 5 acres of this and plant me 6 acres of that. And we got to this point where Osvaldo and I have known each other for many decades. I said, there is an argument to be made that you could be a contract farmer. Whereas if, Todd Mackey Roasting Company really wants Racemosa planted, that he plops down the cash and basically leases acreage of that farm. You plant it and manage that coffee, but it is Todd's coffee. And if it goes sideways due to disease or sideways due to lack of rain, that's Todd's problem. But you as the farmer are making money nevertheless. That would be a model that I would say would work if you want to take suggestions from everybody who visits you. If not, I think that as a buyer or a visitor to a farm, understand that there are things that make up great that year that are not suitable for that farm. And the question I love to ask a farmer when they have a lot of varieties is, why did you choose those specific varieties? Why are those on your farm? And in some cases, it's a well thought out reason that has to do with disease and yield and hardiness, or it grows well because we don't have a lot of rainfall. In many cases, this is what my father did. This is what my grandfather did. I've never even questioned changing that. That is telling as well. But ask those questions, because that sometimes will answer your suggestion before you blurt it out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the willingness to put aside what we think we know, or what we've read, what we're basing assumptions on from prior trips to other places, from what little we might know about, gardening and agronomy, what the tiny bits, and being truly curious really opens up the possibility of understanding the factors at work, which often are far beyond the logic of, hey, you put this in the ground, it works this way. I mean,
right.
We're talking about very primitive systems in lots of cases, even in really elaborate farm scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
These are often, quote, dry farms, like they're, not
Right.
irrigated. And, this is something that is, especially where there are very low farm inputs, or, you're talking about something that is a delicate balance, right? And so entering with a really wide open and pure curiosity is the thing that kind of can teach us so much.
Also, should educate you as the buyer on the capabilities given the surrounding environments there. What used to drive me crazy on group trips with some buyers is they would cup a coffee and say, yeah, I like it, but if it had a little more lemon note, or if it had this, I would like to see more butterscotch. And then you look around and it's like they're using local river water, and the tank is far from sterile, and it's a very rustic environment, and you're like, look, they're making art with very, very rudimentary tools here. If you want absolute perfection, you need to go to a modernized, state-of-the-art farm, and that would be Brazil, where everything can be controlled, temperature and pH controlled fermentation. But asking too much of these producers is just really crazy to me. And I just always wrestled with that on these trips. And where if you take a look around and see what they're actually capable of doing, and be okay with the coffee that's not absolutely perfect. It's not going to be.
Yeah. Perfect is just a conceptual thing. So let's trace the sort of pathways as they meander in your memory, in your mind's eye. What is one unforgettable experience on a coffee trip that you've taken?
Well, I mean, the most impactful one that to this day shaped who I was as a coffee person was a trip that was organized by Paul Katzeff of Thanksgiving Coffee here in Fort Bragg, California. He, if you don't know him, do your research on him. He's a very controversial figure, and taught me probably more than any other coffee person has taught me over the years what to do and what not to do as a coffee professional. And he wrote a project with USAID to create cupping laboratories in Nicaragua, in 10 of the poorest regions in Nicaragua, to teach young coffee professionals the tools to cup, to talk, to sell coffee like a well-funded estate sell. And he leaned on people like myself and Peter Giuliano and Jeff Watts and Doug Zell to go down there and teach cupping, to teach roasting, and to, ideally form relationships individually with these communities, and ideally buy coffee from them. And what was interesting is all of us kind of fell into a community. We didn't overlap. We all went to unique places that were really meaningful to us individually. I remember Scott Merle was in like San Juan de Rio Coco when he was buying for Batdorf and Bronson, and I was, I think Jeff was in Wee Wee Lee, and I was over in Esteli. That was the most impactful trip I ever had, and I was connecting as a teacher, as somebody, as a collaborator, and then as a customer. And those relationships carried me through my entire time of owning TaylorMade. It was by far the most impactful trip.
The potential of these things over the arc of time are pretty staggering. Not only how they affect you in the moment or open up a business opportunity in the moment, but typically, you know, as I've noticed it in my experience, I mean, they're all of my trips and many experiences are sort of a vector to a bigger outcome, you know, even years down the line where relationships open and blossom and become a connector to other relationships. And, you know, that kind of web of how interconnected people are in the coffee world. I mean, it's just undeniable. But
how about you? What was your most impactful?
Yeah, I don't know if I would necessarily say most impactful. I feel like I could probably say for most of the trips I've taken, like I could kind of recount them in a way that they each and every one of them was the most impactful, to be honest. You know, with the exception of a few that probably just, you know, there were less like material outcomes. I think some of the coolest trips that I've been a part of, as I came on board here to what was then Olam Specialty Coffee, is now Kovoya Specialty Coffee. I was recently interviewing Josh for our Meet the Team shorts. We were talking about how in the early days, we actually organized these quality summits for the local cuppers, like cuppers that would be not just at the port offices where we were like prepping for coffees to ship and get packed into containers, but cuppers that were actually at the bodegas and at the buying stations. And we made this effort and we did, I think, 3 or 4 regional events. The first one of which was actually in Uganda. It was in Kampala. And we gathered all of the quality teams from all over East Africa. And we ran a calibration. I mean, at that time, I had already become a Q instructor and, you know, I was using essentially the same type of format to calibrate all of our cupping team. The really interesting, humbling part was just like realizing the amount of, I mean, I've always been very humbled by how important as a buyer, especially as a buyer in our roles where we buy lots of coffees on behalf of lots of people and we influence people in what, you know, hey, you should really pay attention to this, or, you know, that maybe isn't the right opportunity or what have you. But to understand the impact that this type of cupper is essentially tasting everything that goes in.
Oh yeah.
And deciding if it gets separated or not. And to be a part of the effort collaboratively to create agreement on like what is special in our terms, and to say, hey, this is what we want to see, to set aside. This is all this is good, but let's bundle this. Let's bundle those. Let's keep these separate. And that was hugely formative and impactful. That particular event as the first one, the first iteration of these quality events. I also just think, we, after that particular event, Josh and I went with the field manager in Uganda at that time, Amit, who we drove 8 hours together past the mouth of the Nile, where we stopped for lunch. We drove all the way up to Sipi Falls and Mount Elgin, which, you know, if you're aware, it's all the way east. So, I mean, if you imagine a world, you know, without borders, you're essentially in red clay. You could see Kenya. And we stayed at Sipi Falls Lodge right up at the second waterfall. In huts. On Josh's birthday, I had schlepped in some IPAs. There was no refrigeration, so we drank warm Vermont hazy IPA for Josh's birthday up here. But I just remember being on top of the context of the event, being very humbled in just the idea of quality and value, where we were, Uganda has been one of the most depressed coffee economies, and value has been very hard to engineer, or it has been very unrewarded or lightly rewarded, relatively speaking. And you could essentially see the same SL varieties out on the horizon that are getting at that time what was 3 or 4x the price.
Wow.
On the same mountainside, and it was wild. But yeah, I mean, beyond that, we were out with the field manager scouting out a place to put a washing station. Where is there enough water, freshwater flow?
Sure.
Where are we close enough with this water to power where, for such and such a price could actually get power in to create a quality sort of opportunity to engineer quality from cherry, because, there wasn't that type of centralized mill like there would be across the border in Kenya that had created this value. So, yeah, I think, and there's a good handful of other stories. I mean, they seem like it's fun to go back and remember. But
of course,
to think of these times where you're like, wow. And from now to then, I mean, we now have that station. It's been, the advent of high quality, washed and natural and honeyed Eastern Ugandan coffees. I mean, and the cup value and the relative value to the market. I mean, it's crazy to see the trajectory and to see the outcomes. But yeah, that's just that's fun to go back to.
That's a fantastic trip. What year? I remember you guys doing that trip. That
would have been 2016.
Wow.
I believe. 2016, May of 2016. Good stuff. But yeah, I do think, I will say this, Mark, as we wind down, I think it is essential for someone who sees themselves as a coffee buyer and one that wants to be as human as possible in how they conduct their business and how they carry themselves. It is absolutely essential to travel to origin, to understand and empathize and have context for the business and the factors that we are all affected by. That's not to suggest, hey, you have to be there this much, you have to spend this much, you have to accomplish these things. I think there are ways that the first moment I realized the type of ground that pickers were trying to bring the amount of cherry down or up, just to think of what it takes to make coffee what it is. I know you can hear the story. I used to give these classes, these online, webinar classes for SCAA, introduction to coffee. This is the coffee product. And, you put as many pictures of these mills and of these farm situations as you can into it. And none of it does justice.
Oh, yeah.
Outline the reality and the difficulty. I mean, it is hard work, even in mechanized scenarios, to get this done,
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do agree with you there, that's, if you did that alone, to understand what it goes into producing a pound of coffee, it is a humbling experience for sure. I mean, I always joke how the farmers have one short leg, one long leg because of the steep hillsides, and there's no level ground, usually to work on in some of these places. I think that's absolutely right. And I think in addition to that you're an ambassador to your company when you go to these places, and you're representing the ethos of your brand. And ideally, what you're looking for is a suitable partner that has similar ethos to you, or similar or values similar things in coffee, that can forge a great relationship that can last decades if things go well.
Absolutely. Well, anything to cover before we close? Any?
And this is where Mark introduces a new topic that is not the topic of this episode without warning or the permission of the producer. The topic of this mini episode inside the episode is the proper serving of espresso. Yes, for the next 8 minutes, Mark and Todd, mostly Mark, will regale us with their thoughts, mostly Mark's, on the proper way to serve espresso. Mark?
Yeah, I actually do. I've got a beef, Todd. This is my new segment. What's bugging Mark this week? I actually went to tag you on Instagram here over the weekend, but I got your name incorrect, so I didn't tag you properly.
No.
So there is a Todd Mackey out there that's like, why am I tagged in this? So I, as you know, I like to go to the gym. I like to lift. I'm a power lifter, and before I go to the gym, on my way to the gym, I walk from my home. It's about a 1.5 mile walk to the gym. And then I walk home and I get my cardio in that way. And I always stop by independent coffee shops and get a shot of espresso. That's my, just to power me up for the workout ahead. And I went to a shop, which I didn't out on the Instagram, and I'm not going to do it here. And I asked for a shot, and I was just handed a demi-tasse cup and just in my hand, and I was a little bit dumbfounded, and that was the end of the transaction. I go back to my table and I post a picture like, this is what I was handed.
Meaning you didn't get a saucer or a
saucer, spoon, water, nothing. And then the next day I went to another shop and posted a picture of it came on a little handmade ceramic tray, like an actual pottery with a cup, spoon, little glass of sparkling water, and the shot. And I would argue, Todd, that people like me that drink single shots of espresso, we are the Luddites. We're the simple people. We don't ask for much. We're asking for 1 to 1.5 ounces of liquid in a cup, and we're gladly willing to pay for that, and with a nice tip. And if that's all I'm asking, at least get it right. I'm not asking for cold foam. I'm not asking for shakerados or whatever is going on out there. I just want a simple shot in a cup served properly. And I was very taken aback at just being handed a demi-tasse cup. And what ended up happening is a lot of people now have been sending me their whatever shop they go to, how they're served in espresso. And it's kind of taken on a life of its own now, where people are posting their daily shot. But my plea out there to all of you retail coffee shop owners is, think about us little people, the espresso drinker that just drinks espresso, and try to make that experience pleasurable. And appearance says everything. But just handing somebody a cup and being like, move on, that's that I expect that when I'm ordering a brewed drip cup of coffee, and I have no other expectations. But I don't know, that just got on my nerves this week, and I was wondering what's your view on that, Todd, as a former barista.
Sure.
Champion, competitor, and all around trainer. You were also Barista Guild bigwig. What your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, to be clear, just for the sake of accuracy here, I want to be very careful. I was not the United States barista champion ever.
No, you're a champion in my heart, Todd.
Thank you.
That's
In the days of the NERBIC, I was a NERBIC finalist.
NERBIC meaning what now?
Northeast Regional Barista Championship. And that did feed into the National Barista Championship. So, but that's besides the point. I just want to be very clear.
Could you have come up with a better name than NERBIC? I mean, did you?
I've never even heard anyone call it the NERBIC. I'm trying to actually get it set up. It was in the days of the regionals. So there was like the Great Lakes, there was the Southeast, Northeast.
We were Western regionals out here.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I've always been. It's interesting because being from like a punk hardcore scene background, as well as like a hard bop era jazz, those have the big overlap.
Yeah.
It's very like roots, substance first, authenticity driven, where is the meat, the material, the kind of heft of the experience. So it's interesting because I think in most cases I'm all about like no frills, get me to the center, I don't need what's on the fray type of thing.
Yeah.
But I actually think that says a lot about how you would experience coffee, espresso, the cafe experience. I 100% agree with you. I think that it's all about having an excellent experience. And a huge part of that is how someone presents it to you, and not only what it's in,
right,
and the kind of context which matters centrally to it, but also the energy that someone hands you with it. Right. Like if someone is handing you a cup with their hand over top of the rim, and slams it down, versus like, hey, I'm handing you with the handle, I'm spinning it to your dominant side, I'm noticing these things. Like, it changes everything. And
100%.
What is potentially a average, transactional, wow, did I really need that type of experience, becomes, man, I wouldn't trade this for the world.
Right.
Like that experience you have when you go to the shop that is taking care of you, so to speak, is, what is launching you into your workout in this completely transcendental type of way.
Right.
But yeah, that would piss me off too, Mark. I think I'm so sorry it happened. I think it's completely justified that you're upset, and that's a bummer, man.
Well, I posted the question, am I just being a snob, or do I have a point here? Now, I have a lot of people who love to punch down on me because I love to be the butt of the joke. So a lot of people are just saying, you're just being a snob. That's just you. And I'm a snob, a huge snob on many things in life, but I don't think in this particular case I was being a snob here. This is, to me, millions of Italian baristas before me are rolling over in their graves at what I was served.
Of course. I will say, though, when I started as a barista trainer many years ago, there is something to be said for the fact that it was in a ceramic cup. Because we were still in the days where like people would serve it in that 1 ounce paper cup, and you're like, wow, why?
If you handed me that, I would just walk away.
Yeah.
I would never. If I'm ordering espresso for here, if it's coming in paper, I'm walking out the door. It's not happening.
It's disgusting.
No.
Well,
yeah, it's not. It's pointless. That's my beef for the day. If you have a beef for the day, you could email us at. Mike will insert here.
Mark, it was awesome as always joining you. I think, it'll be exciting. I would love to hear from our listeners, on their experiences at Origin, what they see the value of. I think it'd be really interesting to follow up with our listenership that way, if anybody wants to get in touch. So
yeah, send photos of your first Origin trip if you've had it, and send it to us. We'd love to see it.
You've been listening to the Exchange Coffee Podcast, part of the Exchange Coffee Podcasting Network, brought to you by Kavoya Specialty Coffee, where coffee is always a collaborative voyage. The Exchange is hosted by Mark Inman and Todd Mackey, and produced by me, Mike Ferguson. Our free use theme music for this episode is Travel Folk by Paul Uden. Remember, you can always email me at mike.ferguson@kavoya.com. Thanks for listening, and now, your postscript.
He's on a patio,
and he slurps a couple cups. He throws his spoon down. He's so elated, and
you have to back up. He had a little hand turning roaster.
Oh,
so he lit a flame, hand turned roaster, roasts the coffee, grinds it in a hand mill, puts it in a cup, throws the spoon across the patio, breaks out a wad of bills,
hugs the guy,